One challenge with learning graphic design is that we describe it with independent principles, but in reality, those principles are interdependent. They work together. When you change one of them, the others change. So while we will start by defining each principle separately, we will discuss their effects as they work together. Design principles really are just observations of the rules governing human visual perception. This lesson will focus on the four main principles of contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. This list comes from the Non-Designer's Design book by Robin Williams. No, not that Robin Williams. These four are the foundation, and increasing your understanding of them is a better place to start than reading books about German psychologists or memorizing hotkeys in some software. And while I've done a deep dive on the most important types of contrast in other videos, it made more sense to combine proximity, alignment, and repetition together when speaking about them because they are so dependent on each other. In fact, I think each of them is a different aspect of the same thing: relationships. Each of these principles will strengthen or weaken relationships between elements in a composition. These relationships will create a hierarchy or an ordered view of the design. Let's take a moment and define hierarchy. Think of an org chart that shows a company's owner, management, and employees. This is a hierarchy. You know who is in charge, and you know who reports to whom. In a design, the hierarchy is the organization of the elements to signal what is the most important thing and which of the things are related. The focal point of a composition is simply the highest item on the hierarchy. Where the viewer looks after that is the second, and so on. Take this, for example. Many principles are working together to create a specific order of how the viewer's eye flows through the image. And it's not just going left to right and top to bottom. And it's not just size. The proximity, the alignment, the repetition, and the contrast are working together to make that work. So, design and composition are about relationships, the way our eye flows over the image, the hierarchy, or the order that we view things, whether it is legible or not, the mood, the emotion, message, and audience are all affected by how strongly related different elements are. We signal these relationships to the viewer by using proximity, alignment, repetition, and contrast to show that some elements are more closely related than other elements. We instinctively understand this at a basic level of perception. If we see people standing very closely together, if we see a child who looks like their parent, or siblings who share physical attributes, or even if we just see that a group of people are wearing the same uniform, these are all visual cues that indicate strong relationships. Let's learn how to use these principles to guide the viewer's eye. First, let's define the principles. Proximity. Proximity is the distance between elements. How close or how far away they are suggests how related or unrelated they are. The closer the elements, the stronger the relationship. The further apart they get, the less connected they appear. To quote from the book, as in life, the proximity or the closeness implies a relationship. Alignment. Alignment is an easy principle to see and a difficult one to define. Basically, it means to put something in its proper place. In most cases, that means that the outer edges of the elements line up with the matching outer edge of other elements. This creates an implied line and a connected flow of energy between the aligned elements. It's a grounding of a sort. Elements that are all grounded to the same implied line will feel connected and imply a stronger relationship with each other. To quote from the book again, the principle of alignment states, "Nothing should be placed in the page arbitrarily. Every item should have a visual, connecting with something else on the page." Repetition. Any visual choice can be repeated on other elements or contrasted with the opposite. Repetition is when a trait is used in multiple areas of design. Things that share visible traits seem to be closely related to each other. This could be color, pattern, size, shape, texture, line, type, font, mood, theme, symbol, and more. Literally anything visible on or about something will strengthen the relationship of those elements that share a repeated trait. A repetition of visual elements throughout the design unifies and strengthens a piece by tying together otherwise separate parts. Contrast. Contrast is the measurement of the difference between two or more elements. Like repetition's opposite, anything visible can be contrasted by showing that trait's opposite in another element. Typically, things showing contrast are in close proximity to each other. Contrast has a direct inverse correlation to the strength of a relationship. The higher the contrast, The weaker the relationship, or the stronger the difference. The lower the contrast, the more alike the compared elements are. Contrast is one of the most effective ways to add visual interest to your page and create an organizational hierarchy among different elements. For more on contrast, please see the in-depth video where I talk about the most important types of contrast in visual design. Now that we've defined these principles independently, let's see how they work together. Typography is one of the most obvious explanations of how these design principles work together to show relationships. Here's a typography example. Proximity. When you have a subheader closer in proximity to the text underneath it and further from the text above it, the natural assumption is that the header is more related to this text than to this text. So the proximity is indicating the strength or weakness of those relationships. Alignment. All of this text is aligned to the same invisible implied line. You'll notice a rag edge on the right edge and a flush edge on the left. The alignment of the leftmost edge of all of the body copy, subheaders, and header convey the idea that all of this text belong together more than those that are aligned with different elements. Repetition. You'll notice that all of this text is using different sizes and capitalizations, but the typeface is repeated throughout. The color is repeated. The alignment is repeated. All of the body copy, subheaders, and headers follow the same rules. In other words, the size, font, color, weight, alignment, and other visual traits of the body copy is repeated throughout. If we italicize and indent a block of text, it becomes slightly less related. It becomes something different. By decreasing the number of traits that are repeated, this paragraph becomes less related or less like the other paragraphs. We do this with pull quotes to visually signify to the reader that this is to be read and understood differently than the rest of the body copy. In these examples, you'll see how designers use cohesive rules to communicate where you are in the book. Repeating these rules becomes very important because the reader learns to expect certain visuals to happen at specific times. How one chapter ends and the next one starts varies wildly from book to book, but stays exactly the same within that book. It's not that there are a specific set of rules on what the end of a chapter looks like, but there are a specific set of rules established inside of each book. Repetition is important in typography. When you decide what traits your headers have, all of your headers will have those traits. Your headers, subheaders, body copy, bulleted list, numbered list, pull quotes, captions, footnotes, pagination, book titles, and chapter titles all repeat the traits you assign them throughout the work. How you choose to contrast, align, and use proximity in each of these cases becomes a signal of hierarchy and class, so that the reader can instinctively know what is being communicated with those words. They know when the paragraph ends, or when the character is speaking out loud. And just like in typography, all other visuals also use these principles to show relationships. Photography, illustration, animation, and design all use these principles. The contrast, the repetition, the alignment, and the proximity all work together to show how related or unrelated things are, causing hierarchy, the order of importance, or the order in which you view things. I had begun to gather more examples from different categories to show you how they're using these principles, but I actually think that there's a more useful way that you can really solidify what you've learned here. Go to Dribbble, Behance, Cara, EvanERichards.com, 500px, Flickr, ComArts, or wherever you get your inspiration, and start to break down how the pros are using contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity in their compositions. This works in every visual field from architecture to animation, and your understanding and use of it will come from your reverse engineering and experimentation. So take these principles, go look at some stuff, and figure out why and how it works, and then go make stuff.